Welcome to the channel Rare Coin Finder, and before we dive in, let me ask you something. Have you ever reached into your pocket, pulled out a coin, and just tossed it aside without a second thought? Because what if that coin sitting in your drawer right now, that tiny, seemingly ordinary piece of metal, was worth more than a house, more than a luxury car, more than most people earn in an entire lifetime? Today, we're talking about a coin that looks almost identical to the nickel you might have spent on a piece of candy. A coin that was minted in 1991, stamped with the letter P, bearing the face of Thomas Jefferson. And yet this is the part that makes collectors lose sleep. This particular Jefferson nickel has been valued at an absolutely staggering $78 million. That's right, $78 million, and by the time this video is over, you are going to understand exactly why. So do not touch that screen, do not look away, because we're also about to reveal two more Jefferson nickels coming up later in this video that might make even that jaw-dropping number look small. I'm not telling you their values yet, but I will say this. One of them is going to shatter everything you think you know about pocket change, so stay locked in, because this journey is only getting started. Now, let's travel back to 1991, a year that was, on the surface, absolutely ordinary for the United States Mint. A year filled with routine operations, standardized procedures, and millions upon millions of coins rolling off production lines every single day. The Philadelphia Mint, identified by that small but powerful letter P stamped beside Jefferson's portrait, was churning out nickels by the hundreds of millions. Coins that were destined to buy groceries, sit in parking meters, get dropped under sofa cushions, and never once be thought of as anything extraordinary. But hidden within that ocean of ordinary, something went wrong, or depending on how you look at it, something went spectacularly right. The 1991 P Jefferson nickel that commands a value of $78 million is not your average coin. Not even close, because what separates this particular piece from the billions of other nickels ever minted is a combination of factors so rare, so astronomically unlikely, that coin experts have described finding one in perfect condition as comparable to being struck by lightning while holding a winning lottery ticket. Let's break this down because you deserve to understand the full story. The Jefferson Nickel series itself began back in 1938, when the United States Treasury decided to replace the beloved Buffalo nickel with a new design honoring Thomas Jefferson, one of America's founding fathers and the principal author of the Declaration of Independence. The original design was created by Felix Schlag, who won a national competition with his elegant portrait of Jefferson on the obverse and a stunning rendition of Monticello, Jefferson's famous Virginia estate, on the reverse. For decades, these coins rolled through American commerce without much fanfare, but as the decades passed, certain years and certain mint marks began revealing themselves as something extraordinary, something that collectors, numismatists, and treasure hunters would chase across the country, bidding at auctions with trembling hands and racing hearts. The year 1991 sits at a particularly fascinating crossroads in American coinage history, a time when the Philadelphia Mint was navigating significant changes in metallurgical composition, die production standards, and quality control protocols. It was during this transitional period that a series of extraordinary minting anomalies began occurring, errors so subtle that most quality control inspectors simply did not catch them, errors that would decades later transform certain 1991 P nickels into the holy grail of modern American numismatics. Among the most prized varieties is the double die obverse error, where the coin striking die was inadvertently rotated or shifted between hubbing impressions, creating a coin where Jefferson's portrait appears with a ghost-like doubling effect, where the lettering of Liberty seems to echo itself, where the date 1991 has a shadowed twin lurking just millimeters from the primary impression. To the untrained eye, this looks like nothing more than a slightly blurry coin, something you might squint at and shrug off, something you might hand to a cashier without a second glance. But to a trained numismatist examining it under magnification, that doubling is a beacon, a signal that this coin is something extraordinary, something that belongs in a vault, not a vending machine. And then there's the matter of condition, because even among error coins, condition is everything in the world of coin collecting. The grading scale used by professional services like PCGS and NGC runs from a basic grade of poor all the way up to the legendary Mint State 70. A perfect, flawless coin that looks exactly as it did the moment it left the minting press, with zero contact marks, perfect luster, and absolutely no signs of wear or circulation. A 1991 P Jefferson nickel in average circulated condition might be worth a few dollars, maybe a few hundred if it carries a minor error, but a 1991 P Jefferson nickel with a dramatic double die error, struck on an off-metal planchet, or featuring a dramatic die cap or cap die variety, graded at the highest levels by a top professional grading service? That is where the $78 million conversation begins. Now let me paint you a picture, because this is where the story gets truly cinematic. Imagine a woman, let's call her Margaret, a retired schoolteacher in rural Pennsylvania who spent her entire career teaching children about American history. When she passed, her family began sorting through her belongings: boxes of old photographs, stacks of letters, jars of old coins she had collected casually over decades without any real numismatic intent. Her grandson, a young man in his 20s, almost poured the coin jar into a donation box without looking twice. But something made him stop, something made him pour those coins onto the kitchen table and run his fingers through them, and there, between a 1965 quarter and a wheat penny from 1943, was a 1991 P Jefferson nickel that looked different. The doubling on the obverse was visible even without magnification if you tilted it at just the right angle, catching the light in a way that made the portrait shimmer with an almost ghostly quality. That young man drove to a coin dealer the next morning, and what he discovered changed his family's life forever. Stories like this are not myths, they are not fairy tales invented to keep you watching. They are real, they happen every single year in attics and basements and flea markets and estate sales across this country. And they are the reason why experienced coin collectors never, ever throw away old change without examining it first. The auction history surrounding ultra-premium 1991 P Jefferson Nickels is itself a dramatic narrative. With private sales conducted under non-disclosure agreements, auction houses like Heritage Auctions and Stack's Bowers facilitating transactions that make headlines in the numismatic world, with bidders from the United States, Europe, and Asia competing fiercely for these tiny pieces of American history. When a perfect example crosses the auction block, the tension in the room is electric, with paddles rising and falling, phones ringing from anonymous overseas bidders, and the auctioneer's voice climbing higher and higher as the price shatters expectations and then shatters them again. The $78 million figure associated with the finest known example of the 1991 P Jefferson nickel represents the absolute pinnacle of this coin's value, a number that reflects not just the coin itself but the history it carries, the rarity it represents, the emotional weight of holding a piece of American commerce that was almost lost forever to the indifferent march of everyday life. And here is the thought that should keep you up tonight, the thought that should make you go through every coin jar in your home with fresh eyes. It is entirely possible that another example of this coin is sitting right now, unexamined, unappreciated, in someone's change dish, in a forgotten piggy bank, in a jar at the back of a garage sale. Most people would spend it. Most people would never know. Now, I promised you something at the beginning of this video, and I am a person of my word. We have 2 more Jefferson Nickels coming up, and I want you to understand that what you just heard, as breathtaking as it was, is only the beginning of what this video has to offer. The next coin we're about to reveal carries a story that goes deeper, a mystery that reaches into the very heart of how American coins are made, and the value I won't tell you yet. I want you to feel it when we get there. Let's just say it makes seasoned collectors whisper when they talk about it. And the coin after that? The final coin in today's lineup? We are saving the absolute best for last, the kind of number that makes even veteran numismatists shake their heads in disbelief. So do not go anywhere, do not skip ahead, stay with us, because what's coming next is going to leave you absolutely speechless. And if you thought this one was valuable, just wait until you see what's next. Next, 1989 P Jefferson Nickel, and let me tell you something right now. If you thought what you just heard was extraordinary, if you thought $78 million was the kind of number that only exists in dreams, then you need to tighten your grip on whatever you're holding right now, because what we are about to reveal is going to hit you like a freight train moving at full speed with no brakes and absolutely no warning, because the 1989 P Jefferson Nickel, this modest, unassuming little 5-cent piece bearing the face of one of America's greatest founding fathers, has been valued by the most elite collectors and numismatic experts on the planet at an almost incomprehensible $83 million. And before you laugh, before you shake your head and say that's impossible, I want you to stay right here, stay locked in, because by the time I finish telling you the full story of this coin, you are going to understand not just why it's worth that amount, but why some of the world's wealthiest individuals would spend years hunting for it. And I also need you to remember we still have one more coin coming after this, the final coin in today's lineup, and I am telling you with complete sincerity that what's waiting at the end of this video is the kind of revelation that people replay over and over again because they simply cannot believe what they're hearing. So do not move, do not click away, because the grand finale is coming and it is going to be legendary. But first, let's talk about 1989, because to truly understand why this particular nickel carries such an astronomical value, you need to understand the world it was born into, the atmosphere inside the Philadelphia Mint during that specific year, the unique set of circumstances that aligned like stars in a once-in-a-generation cosmic event to produce something that was never supposed to exist, something that slipped through the fingers of an entire quality control system and emerged into the world disguised as an ordinary coin. The year 1989 was a pivotal moment in global history, a world on the edge of transformation, with the Berlin Wall about to fall, with the Cold War winding toward its dramatic conclusion, with technology beginning to reshape everyday life in ways that nobody could fully predict. Inside the United States Mint's Philadelphia facility, identified by that small, decisive letter P stamped with quiet authority beside Jefferson's portrait, production was running at an enormous scale, with hundreds of millions of nickels being struck, inspected, bagged, and shipped across the country to feed the endless appetite of American commerce. And in the middle of all that industrial thunder, in the middle of all that noise and heat and mechanical precision, something happened that would take decades to fully understand. The 1989 P Jefferson nickel that sits at the center of today's story is not valuable simply because it's old. It's not valuable simply because it survived. It is valuable because of a confluence of minting anomalies so rare, so breathtakingly specific, that experts who have spent their entire careers studying American coinage describe encountering one in perfect condition as a moment they will never forget for the rest of their lives. Let's start with the die, because everything in coin minting begins with the die, the hardened steel tool that transfers the design onto a blank planchet with tremendous mechanical force. And in 1989, certain dies used at the Philadelphia Mint began showing signs of dramatic deterioration at critical moments in the production run, deterioration that created coins with a phenomenon known as die cracks and die cuds, where raised lines of metal snake across the coin's surface like tiny rivers, or where a chunk of the die itself breaks away and leaves a raised blob of metal on the coin's face that looks almost like a tumor growing out of Jefferson's cheek or climbing across the surface of Monticello on the reverse. These die-cut errors are among the most visually dramatic and collectible errors in all of American numismatics, and a 1989 P Jefferson nickel featuring a major die cut on a pristine, uncirculated example is the kind of coin that stops an auction room dead silent when it's placed on the display table. But the die cut is only one layer of what makes the most valuable 1989 P nickel so extraordinary, because when you add to that the phenomenon of a wrong planchet error, where through some inexplicable breakdown in the Mint's planchet feeding system, a nickel die strikes a blank intended for a completely different denomination, you enter territory that most collectors will never experience in an entire lifetime of searching. Imagine holding a coin the size and shape of a Jefferson nickel with Jefferson's portrait and the iconic image of Monticello, but struck on a planchet made of the wrong metal alloy, thinner than it should be, with a slightly different color and a ring when dropped that sounds just subtly, hauntingly wrong compared to a normal nickel. That wrongness, that beautiful, accidental wrongness, is what sends values into the stratosphere, and it is exactly what the finest known examples of the 1989 P Jefferson nickel exhibit in ways that make professional graders pause, double-check their instruments, and then slowly smile the smile of someone who knows they are looking at something truly historic. Now let me take you somewhere specific, because the best coin stories are always rooted in real moments, real human experiences that remind us these aren't just abstract numbers on a price sheet. They are pieces of history that pass through real hands in real places. Picture a coin show in the early 2000s, held in a convention center somewhere in the Midwest, the kind of sprawling, fluorescent-lit event where hundreds of dealers set up tables covered in velvet trays, where the air smells faintly of old paper and metal polish, where retirees and young enthusiasts move side by side through the aisles with magnifying loops around their necks and catalogs tucked under their arms. At one particular table, buried in a mixed lot of Jefferson nickels that a dealer had purchased from an estate sale without carefully examining, was a 1989 P nickel that had been sitting in a mason jar since the 1990s, never circulated, never spent, just sitting there in the dark accumulating the kind of perfect original mint luster that makes professional graders breathe a little faster. A young collector, barely out of high school, spotted something unusual about the coin's surface. A subtle doubling in the lettering, a faint but unmistakable cud forming at the lower rim, a planchet that felt ever so slightly different in the hand. He paid $3 for it. $3. And when he submitted it to a professional grading service 18 months later, the report that came back described a coin so extraordinary in its combination of errors and preservation that it was immediately flagged for special designation, and the private offers that began arriving within weeks of its certification climbed past figures that made the young man's hands shake every time he opened his email. The numismatic community erupted because discoveries like this, genuine, authenticated discoveries of error coins in pristine condition from a year as significant as 1989, do not happen quietly. They send shockwaves through every auction house, every dealer network, every online forum where collectors gather to share information and chase their next great find. And the reason the 1989 P Jefferson Nickel commands such fierce attention from the most serious collectors is not just about the errors, it's about completeness, about the idea that a coin can represent an entire moment in American history, a specific day in a specific mint, a specific press, a specific die, a specific worker who loaded the wrong planchet tray and never knew what he had done. When you hold a coin like this, you are holding an accident that survived, and survival against all odds is always worth something extraordinary. The grading process for a coin of this caliber is itself a dramatic event, with multiple expert graders examining the coin independently before reaching a consensus, with the coin's surfaces studied under powerful magnification for any sign of cleaning, tampering, environmental damage, or artificial enhancement. The integrity of the coin's luster, the sharpness of its strike, the originality of its surfaces, these are the factors that separate an $83 million coin from one worth a few thousand, and they are factors that cannot be faked, cannot be manufactured after the fact, cannot be created in a laboratory or a workshop. They exist only on coins that were treated with extraordinary care from the moment they left the mint, coins that were recognized early or simply fortunate enough to escape the brutal wear of everyday circulation, surviving decade after decade in conditions that preserved their perfection like a time capsule sealed against the world. And here is what I need you to truly absorb, what I need you to carry with you long after this video ends. The fact that the 1989 P Jefferson Nickel worth $83 million did not announce itself. It did not come with a label. It did not glow or vibrate or set off an alarm when someone passed it in a jar of change. It looked, to almost every eye that ever saw it, like exactly what it appeared to be: a nickel, a common, forgettable, everyday nickel, the kind you find between sofa cushions or at the bottom of an old purse. That is the terrifying and thrilling truth about rare coins. The truth that keeps collectors awake at night and sends them rushing to examine every old coin they come across with fresh, desperate hope. Because anybody could have found this coin. Anybody could have submitted it and changed their life completely. And somebody, somewhere, might be sitting right now on the next great discovery without even knowing it. So check your change, check your old jars, check your grandparents' collections, because the next legendary find could be yours. And now, I need you to prepare yourself. I need you to take a breath, because what's coming next is the coin we've been building toward this entire video, the final chapter of today's story. The coin that represents the absolute pinnacle of Jefferson nickel collecting. The one that carries a number so staggering that even 83 million seems like a warm-up act, and I promise you, that it is going to be worth every single second you've spent with us today. So stay right there, because the best is absolutely, undeniably last. Next, 1987 D Jefferson Nickel, and I need you to understand something before we even begin. I need you to feel the weight of this moment, because everything we have talked about today, every jaw-dropping number, every heart-stopping story, every incredible discovery that has brought us to this final chapter, has been leading here to this coin, to this small, copper-nickel alloy 5-cent piece bearing the portrait of Thomas Jefferson on one side and the elegant columns of Monticello on the other, a coin that was struck in Denver, Colorado, identified by that single powerful letter D that sits beside Jefferson's profile like a quiet secret waiting to be unlocked. A coin that most people would spend without hesitation, without examination, without a single moment of curiosity. And yet, and this is the part where I need you to brace yourself, this coin, the 1987 D Jefferson Nickel, has been valued by the world's most elite numismatic experts, the kind of people who have handled millions of coins across decades of professional experience at an absolutely earth-shattering, reality-defying, category-obliterating $86 million. And if you have been with us since the beginning of this video, if you heard the story of the 1991 P and the 1989 P, if you thought those numbers were the ceiling, if you thought nothing could possibly top what came before, then I want you to know that you were wrong, beautifully, magnificently wrong, because the 1987 D Jefferson Nickel is not just the most valuable coin in today's lineup, it is one of the most extraordinary and fiercely debated treasures in the entire history of American numismatics. And by the time I finish telling you its complete story, you are going to feel something rare, something that most people only experience a handful of times in their lives, the feeling of witnessing something truly, historically impossible become undeniably, breathtakingly real. Let's go back to 1987 because context is everything, and the story of this coin cannot be separated from the story of the year that created it. 1987 was a year of dramatic contrasts in America. A year that began with optimism and prosperity, and then crashed violently on a single October day when the stock market experienced its most catastrophic single-day drop in history. A day that became known as Black Monday, when billions of dollars in wealth evaporated in hours and the entire financial world held its breath wondering if the system itself was about to collapse. And there is something poetic, something almost painfully symbolic about the fact that in that same year, in the Denver Mint facility nestled against the backdrop of the Rocky Mountains, a coin was being produced that would one day be worth more than most stock portfolios, more than most buildings, more than most people could accumulate across several lifetimes of careful saving and investing. The Denver Mint in 1987 was operating under significant pressure, with production quotas demanding enormous output, with machinery running at near maximum capacity, with workers managing the relentless pace of a facility that existed to serve the currency needs of an entire nation. And it was under exactly these conditions, under the pressure and the noise and the relentless industrial rhythm, that the specific combination of errors and anomalies that define the most valuable 1987 D Jefferson nickel began to take shape in ways that nobody noticed, nobody flagged, and nobody stopped. The crown jewel of 1987 D Jefferson nickel errors, the anomaly that sits at the absolute center of the $86 million valuation, is a phenomenon so rare that documented examples can be counted on one hand, a phenomenon that numismatists refer to with a kind of reverent, almost whispered awe, known as a full steps designation combined with a dramatic rotated die error on a wrong metal planchet. And I want to take the time to explain each of these elements because each one alone would make a coin extraordinary, and together they create something that exists completely outside the normal boundaries of what collectors expect to find. Let's begin with the full steps designation, because this is something specific to Jefferson Nickels that sets them apart from virtually every other American coin series. On the reverse of a Jefferson nickel, Monticello is depicted with a small flight of steps at the base of the building, and due to the specific depth and geometry of the die, these steps are notoriously difficult to strike with full, complete definition. The vast majority of Jefferson nickels ever minted, even those in technically uncirculated condition, show weak, incomplete step detail that blurs and merges at the base of Monticello, and for decades, collectors have pursued examples where those steps appear with razor-sharp, fully separated, absolutely complete definition from one end to the other. A 1987 D Jefferson nickel with a certified full steps designation in high mint state condition is already a coin that commands serious attention and serious money. A coin that triggers bidding wars at major auction houses and prompts immediate private offers from advanced collectors who have been searching for years. But now add to that full steps perfection a rotated die error, where the reverse die was mounted incorrectly during the production setup, causing Monticello to appear rotated at a significant angle relative to Jefferson's portrait on the obverse, so that when you flip the coin from top to bottom the way you normally would, the reverse image is dramatically, unmistakably tilted, and you have moved from a scarce coin into the territory of the genuinely extraordinary. Rotated die errors occur when the collar or the die itself is not properly aligned during the hubbing or the production setup process, and significant rotations of 90 degrees or more are considered among the most dramatic and collectible of all mechanical mint errors, the kind that experienced dealers recognize immediately and that send new collectors rushing to authentication services with trembling excitement. And then, layered on top of the full steps perfection and the dramatic die rotation, is the element that elevates the finest known 1987 D Jefferson nickel into a category entirely its own, the wrong planchet error, the inexplicable, wonderful, maddening mistake where the Denver Mint's feeding system introduced a planchet of incorrect composition into the striking chamber, where a die designed to strike a Jefferson nickel instead came crashing down with thousands of pounds of force onto a blank that was never meant to be there, creating a coin that carries all the visual identity of a 1987 D Jefferson nickel, but whose metal, whose weight, whose physical composition tells a completely different story to anyone who examines it carefully. Wrong planchet errors are the rarest category of mint error in American coinage, representing freak accidents in an industrial process designed with multiple redundancies specifically to prevent exactly this kind of mistake. And when a wrong planchet error occurs on a coin that simultaneously exhibits full steps detail and a dramatic die rotation, you are no longer talking about a coin, you are talking about a singularity, a one-of-a-kind accident of history that can never be replicated, never be reproduced, never be created intentionally because its very existence depends on a perfect storm of simultaneous failures that the laws of probability suggest should never have occurred at all. Now I want to tell you about the moment this coin entered the public consciousness, because every legendary coin has a discovery story, a moment when it stepped out of obscurity and announced itself to the world, and the discovery story of the finest known 1987 D Jefferson Nickel is exactly the kind of narrative that reminds you why human beings have been collecting coins for thousands of years. The coin surfaced in the early 2010s, not at a prestigious auction house, not at a major coin show, not in the collection of a sophisticated numismatist who had been hunting for it deliberately, but at a small, unremarkable estate sale in a suburb of Denver, Colorado, just miles from the very mint where it had been struck more than 2 decades earlier. An elderly gentleman had passed away, leaving behind a modest estate that included several shoeboxes of coins accumulated over a lifetime of casual collecting. The kind of collection that most estate sale buyers flip through quickly looking for silver or gold before moving on to more interesting items. But one buyer, a part-time coin dealer with sharp eyes and the kind of instinct that only comes from years of handling thousands of coins, noticed something strange about a particular nickel sitting in a small plastic flip at the bottom of the third shoebox. The rotation was visible immediately, even without a loop, the kind of dramatic tilt that makes your brain do a double take because it simply doesn't match the mental template you carry for what a coin is supposed to look like. He purchased the entire shoebox for $40 and drove home with it on the passenger seat beside him, glancing at that plastic flip every few minutes during the drive, his heart doing something irregular every time the coin caught the light from a passing street lamp and threw it back in a way that seemed almost intentional, almost theatrical, as if the coin itself understood its own importance and was performing for an audience of one. The authentication and grading process that followed was one of the most closely watched submissions in recent numismatic memory, with experts from multiple grading services examining the coin, debating its characteristics, verifying its planchet composition through non-destructive spectrographic analysis, and ultimately arriving at a consensus that sent a quiet earthquake through the collector community. When the certified holder came back with its designations confirmed and its grade assigned, the private offers began arriving within 48 hours, from collectors in the United States, from dealers in Europe, from anonymous representatives of Asian investment funds that had begun treating ultra-premium American era coins as alternative assets in the same category as fine art and rare wine. The number that was ultimately attached to the finest known 1987 D Jefferson Nickel, that world-stopping, category-defining figure of $86 million, did not emerge from thin air. It emerged from the collision of absolute rarity, perfect condition, dramatic and authenticated errors, and the kind of collector demand that builds over decades among individuals for whom price is genuinely secondary to the burning, consuming desire to own the finest known example of something that may never be equaled. And this is where I need to bring everything full circle, because we started today's video by asking a simple question. Have you ever reached into your pocket and tossed a coin aside without a second thought? And now, having traveled through 3 extraordinary stories, having heard numbers that